my name is Mary Ellen Biggerstaff. I am a nurse practitioner. I have a doctorate in nursing and I'm about to complete a master's degree in public health at UC Berkeley this summer. I'm a 30-year resident of Thurston County. I moved here when I was 11 years old and have come back here and decided to raise our children with my husband and among our extended family. We live next to my in-laws and my mother lives very close as well. So this is very much my home community. I've been a nurse practitioner for the past 10 years where I've worked in rural and community healthcare clinics and opiate use with opiate use disorder with Olympia Butte Clinic and Suboxone. And really my decision to run has really been because of the frustrations of the inequalities and the things that I see in my clinic day in and day out. I have a lot of training and I'm very experienced as a provider, but there's only so much that you can do in a clinic room for patients when they are facing housing crises or mental health problems that you just can't address. So that was really my impetus for wanting to be involved in policy and politics. That was also really coincided with my frustrations when the clinic coincided with the 2016 election, which I think changed all of us a little bit, realizing and thinking about how much we all needed to be involved in our democracy on a deeper level. In the past several years, I've been very involved in Medicare for All advocacy. And then when this position, I found out that there was going to be an open seat, I decided that was the time that I was ready to run and I was ready to go for it in March. The most important issues, I have other issues on my platform, but absolutely my most important issues are affordable housing and universal health care. I think we really need to prioritize making sure that everybody can afford to live in the county. Maybe not every single person, but people that are at the bottom of the economic scale, whether they are living on Social Security or minimum wage, they need to be able to afford housing. And if we continue to do nothing but build market rate housing, I think that that's only going to make the housing problem and homeless crisis that we all see every day worse. I think that we need to be looking at public options for that, including community land trusts, ensuring that 25% of any new development is set aside for affordable housing that can be afforded at a lower income level, and looking at other public and social housing options within this. The other thing that's really important to me is universal health care. Obviously, I'm not going to be able to vote for Medicare for All as a state representative. That's not possible at the state level. But I think Whole Washington is doing a lot of really great work with their initiative and looking seriously at what universal health care coverage might look like in Washington state. And within that, I also think that we could very much strengthen our public health systems and offer primary care, substance abuse, dental care through our county health departments. And Oregon does that quite a bit and does quite a bit better job than what we do through Multnomah County and other clinics that I've been able to work with. And so I think really focusing on that and what we can do and get ready for having a federal universal healthcare coverage, and that we can expand clinics and be ready to provide access to everyone in this state and meet all their healthcare needs.
And thanks, Bob, for taking over in my place. And thank you, Mary Ellen. In case you haven't heard, this is the third of our session for LD22 and County Commissioner Q&A sessions, meet and greet sessions. And thanks for your introductory remarks, Mary Ellen. We'll go ahead with about a half an hour of Q&A. I already have some questions here that were submitted in advance, and I'll go through those first. And if anyone has any more questions, you can send them to me via the chat app at the bottom of the screen. If you scroll across the screen, you'll see the chat icon down there. Address it to me, and I'll be sure to read it as it comes in. So the first question for Mary Ellen. On your questionnaire that you sent back to OI, you said that firearms controls were not part of your core platform. But what do you see as needs for possible gun violence protection in the way of legislation?
Yeah, and I would like to say it's not because it's not necessarily important to me. So it just wasn't one of the top 2 or 3 issues that came up. And I think we really need to look at gun violence as a public health issue, and that is, I think we can look at a lot of things as a public health issue, but we should absolutely strengthen. We've made some really good progress with the laws that Drew Hansen, I know, sponsored last year, legislation to help prevent. Sorry, I'm stumbling, to promote gun control. And I think I actually just talked to the Alliance for Gun Responsibility in Washington State. I think we certainly need to limit the ability of people to be able to buy firearms and limit their magazine sizes. We need to have strong background checks so that you can't just walk in and buy a firearm. I also think it's very important that we look at other public health gun reduction deaths, especially focusing on suicide and access to people that have depression and mental health, and making sure that we can intervene and take guns away if that's the case, that somebody is either a major risk to themselves or a major risk to others. And yeah, I think that those are some, and I would be very supportive of strong gun control legislation. And I think when you view it through a public health lens, that's really the only thing that makes sense. I would also add that I'm not 100% certain how it would work at the state level or whether it'd be another federal bill, but I know that I have heard really great things about the idea of requiring gun owners to have insurance, and that would significantly reduce gun ownership without having any kind of limitation to what people could access. They would have the ability to buy weapons, but that they needed to be able to pay for insurance and to make sure of any damage that their guns did. I think that is an excellent idea.
So insurance, you're talking about liability insurance?
Yes, liability insurance. So similar to car insurance, where that you would have, if you were going to purchase a gun, that you would have to be able to purchase liability insurance, and that you'd be responsible for any damage that that gun was involved in.
Okay, that's interesting to hear. I haven't heard many candidates bring that possibility up. Anything else about gun violence? How about gun buyback? Some, I believe, as counties or sheriff jurisdictions allow resale after guns are bought back, resale to the community. What do you think about that?
I have not really seen that those are particularly effective programs. I don't have any problem with that whatsoever. And I do think that you do need to frame discussions of gun control and gun violence prevention as a public health issue, and not really attack it full on with an argumentative, a very argumentative approach that would potentially make people that do own guns more reactive and more hostile. I relate a lot of it to conversations that I have with families at well child exams or in clinic visits, where we talk about, I have a lot of patients that are hunters and are gun owners, and how you talk about prevention of gun violence and to make sure that the guns are safe and are not going to be used for bad purposes and to harm people, rather than trying to focus on a very blanket statement of like, we just shouldn't have guns anymore, people shouldn't have any access to guns. I think it's much more beneficial to frame it as, what do we do to have harm reduction?
All right, thank you. From whom have you received endorsements, and who might you be seeking endorsements from?
So as of right now, I have received endorsements from Jeff Sowers, who is the chair of the LD22. I have Clark Gilman on the Olympia City Council has endorsed me. I have over 55 community members that have endorsed me. I am currently waiting to hear back from the WSNA, which is the nurses union, as well as I have we have a meeting for the LD22. Democrats are going to endorse me. I'm hoping that they will endorse me. I have received campaign services from the Thurston County Democrats, but because there are multiple Democrats in that race, they're not going to endorse before the primary.
And of course, Olympia Indivisible.
Yes, and yes. I thought that would go without saying.
That's kind of why we're here, isn't it? Okay, Washington State bill passed in 1999 would not allow for State Environmental Protection Act or Growth Management Act appeal for developers in Washington. What do you think of that issue?
Well, and I have become very familiar with HB 1923 and kind of the overriding of those laws. I think I'm pretty disappointed that was actually overridden at the state law. I have spent a lot of time talking with housing advocates and people that were opposed to the missing middle legislation, and were very disappointed that the state came in and overrode that. I try to see multiple sides to different issues and try and understand what are the benefits, and not just have a blanket statement of, oh, this is a bad bill or that's a bad bill, and try and understand better what they're going to do. But it's hard for me to see any side of that that does not involve quite a bit of environmental destruction. I know that developers and new developments are some of the biggest polluters for our water and causing a lot of environmental harm. And to override those restrictions that were in place to help manage growth so that we don't do much environmental harm, I have a hard time seeing the good side to that.
And what would you like to do about that?
Well, I would, if it was just up to me, I would like to, at very minimum, revise HB 1923. I know that there's pending legal cases as well, but I think that new development should absolutely be under the Growth Management Act, and we need to be making sure that there are impact fees that offset in both environmental and affordable housing costs to new development. I don't think that we can. I think that from what I understand right now, new housing developers and land developers have too much power, and they are able to override too many of our other important factors in building development.
Okay. And where do you place education in your platform?
Very high. I know that we are really facing, I already know that the repercussions of the economic crisis because of COVID are already starting to affect schools and school boards, and they're having to make cuts. I would really love to see that we truly fully funded education so that school districts did not have to rely on levies to balance out their cost. My children are in the Olympia High School District, and I know that we have really benefited from having a very generous community that really supports the schools, but I know that's not available to everyone, and I think that we should enact taxation reform so that we could fully fund education that was equal throughout the state.
Any taxation reforms in mind?
Yeah, if it was up to me, I would like to see an income tax, and I think we could implement an income tax of 10% that we could offset some of the property tax and sales tax that we currently have. If that is not possible, because I know there's legal restrictions as well, I think a capital gains tax is a good idea.
So are you proposing a flat tax? You said 10% as a flat tax?
Sorry, an income tax, and I believe that the suggestions have been that starts over $100,000 a year income, that everybody in Washington State would pay a 10% income tax. Yes.
10% on over 100,000 income.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. During your April 25th interview with the State Progressive Caucus, you said that you supported greater use of nuclear electric power plants because nuclear is carbon neutral. Isn't toxic nuclear waste more of a long-term danger to human life than carbon dioxide emissions?
You know, and I'm actually glad I get to redress that, because I do think that was a stumble on my part. Is that the question I had actually been asked at that meeting was, is nuclear energy considered clean energy? And one was speaking off the top of my head, which I'm learning, to be very careful about speaking before I know exactly what I'm answering. So no, I would not be in favor of nuclear energy to replace carbon energy. Although I have now had the chance to talk to several people that knew more than me that suggested things that I should read and learn about. And it sounds like there's actually a pretty significant debate about whether nuclear energy should be considered clean energy because it doesn't have carbon. But no, I would not be in favor of supporting nuclear powered energy. So okay. I'm glad I get the chance to clarify that.
So I think you recognize that that storage of the nuclear waste is a long-term issue.
Yeah.
And from what I know, I understand that there's a cap on liability that that nuclear power operators work under. So if the damage gets above a certain level, they don't have to worry about it. And I think that's not entirely the way to deal with that kind of energy. Thank you. Okay. Would you support any new taxes to increase revenues? And you touched on it a little earlier.
Yes. We have a very and I think everybody probably that's paying attention, we have an incredibly regressive tax system in Washington State, one of the worst in the country. And I think that we need to change that. And so I would hope that would not, a new tax structure and adding an income tax would be supplemented by the federal tax revenues, especially for, more working class families, or the reimbursement. But sorry, refund is the word I want to use, federal income tax refund. But I think that we absolutely need to not rely so much on sales tax and property taxes in this state. And I'm very bold about feeling like we really need to invest strongly in public good and public social infrastructure. And I know that those things are not cheap. And so I think that we need to be able to raise new revenue that goes around existing tax structures to fund those programs.
And in your education platform, would you support public funds for charter schools?
No, I would not. I think they undermine really solid, equal public education.
Okay, all right. Again, if anyone has any questions, you can send them to me via the chat icon on the bottom. Let's see. Do you believe that Washington State should be a sanctuary state for undocumented immigrants? And please give some details if you can.
Yeah. Well, again, if I'm running for the state, so that would probably be the only thing that I would be able to have, real authority over. I would very much like to see widespread federal immigration reform. I think that we need to have a path to citizenship because it does not exist for many of the immigrants in this community. And I think that we could legalize many millions of the people that are living in this country without any real lasting economic damage. And I think that would be better for both our economy, and I think it would certainly be better for those people that live in our state so that they could have access to full opportunities. Given that that's not what we have control over, yes, I think that us being a sanctuary state and not contributing to immigrants being harmed in our judicial system is, even if they are here and they're undocumented, is a good idea. My area of medical research and clinical research has been in telling nurses how to act as advocates and how to help prevent policies that would allow immigrants that were seeking medical care to be reported to law enforcement, and to make sure that we can prevent that from happening.
Okay, so is the law enforcement route the major problem? For instance, if there were civilian employees, city employees, say zoning inspectors, and they came across something that they thought was an undocumented person living in a dwelling, perhaps. Would they be under the same restrictions, regulations that you'd want to enforce?
I do want to be careful because I know fairly well what the laws revolving around healthcare and what those look like. I don't know as much about what it would be for city and state employees. I like the idea very much of the state sending the message saying that we are not going to actively participate in reporting people that aren't causing anybody any harm, and that we're not going to encourage that. I don't know if that's answering your question. So yes, I would say the sanctuary cities would encourage people not to do that, not to report and undocumented immigrants.
Right, and I was going to ask what would be your definition of a sanctuary entity?
Yeah, and I think that there's a lot. It's very tricky legally, even within the healthcare system. And I think that would be just one, sending the message and kind of making it like in a hospital, you make it the policy that you are not going to actively cooperate with ICE or immigration enforcement officials. You're not going to report patients. You're not going, I mean, if you're served with a warrant, you do what you have to do, but you're not going to actively participate in an undocumented immigrant entering into that system. And I guess that for a hospital, that makes, and I think on a state level, that makes a lot of sense.
Okay. What legislation should be enacted to combat climate change?
So at a state level, I think that a few things. I think the idea of a Washington Green New Deal that was presented, and I'm trying to remember the organization that put that out, but supported a transition to clean energy that involved retraining of employees and personnel that are involved in fossil fuel energy is a very good idea. My dream would absolutely be to invest in a very robust rail system. I have gotten to travel a lot, and especially in Japan and Holland and the Netherlands, thinking of, you know, cities where you go and you have extensive railway systems and nobody is reliant on their fossil fuels and their private vehicles. That would be incredible. I know that that would be a big goal. I also would absolutely consider a carbon tax as long as it was not disproportionately harmful to people that were lower income and working class.
Could you elaborate on how that carbon tax might be implemented?
I really don't know. I don't have any more details other than I think that the idea of needing a carbon tax is certainly proposed in a good way to offset that transition to clean energy. I would really need to know more information before I would speak with that. Yeah.
So you think more a carbon usage tax on a retail level, on a wholesale level? Thrown out ideas.
So I think that a carbon tax that targeted more of bigger businesses and corporations, industrial entities, rather than individuals that might be lower income would be a good start.
And you mentioned the transition phase. Do you see natural gas as in the portfolio in the transition as a transition option?
I would prefer that we did not. I do not consider natural gas a clean energy. If it was completely up to me and I had the choice, I would rely on geothermal, wind, solar energies that did not cause harm. Natural gas causes a significant amount of harm.
Okay. Go ahead.
Oh, and the other thing that I was going to say, and I mentioned it earlier, but I think that one thing that we really can control, whereas global climate change we're a little bit at the mercy of what's going on internationally and at the federal level in our state. I think that we can make sure that we are protecting our waterways and our existing wildlife as we develop and as we grow our cities and as our population increases. So I think that's a really big important piece that we can control within Washington State.
My pet peeve is the exit 111 interchange. I scratched my head wondering, why was this necessary? It cost $35 million, if I read the sign right. Could that money have been spent in other ways?
Yeah, and I'm trying to think off the top of my head which one is exit 111.
Marvin Road.
Marvin Road. Okay. Yeah, and I was actually just going through the Sierra Club platform. I do appreciate that environmental issues is not my absolute best knowledge area, that I feel like I still have a fair amount to learn and I want to know more. But I would really, really like us to see us investing more in railways and ways that do not involve just funneling all of our money into freeway systems and individual transportation systems.
Okay. I've brought this up with other candidates regarding like a seamless, for instance, the Sound Transit District ends at the Pierce County, Thurston County line, and the Interstate City Transit District takes over from there. Is there a seamless way to connect the two so that there might be better better access, rail access, for instance, to Seattle from here?
Yeah, I mean, I absolutely, and that actually does come back to having traveled. Several years ago, I was able to travel through Japan, and the Shinkansen, which is the high-speed rail system that exists everywhere. I mean, it's really a modern marvel. I don't know the specifics of exactly how long it took to build, how expensive it was, but you can't visit there and not realize that we could do a lot better. I don't see why on earth we could not consider having a high-speed rail that goes up and down the West Coast and that would facilitate, people commuting to Seattle from Olympia or down to Portland, and then incorporate that regionally so that you have rail service out to rural areas such as Grays Harbor County and Aberdeen that would work.
Okay, thank you. How would you support the growth of small businesses in the rural parts of the state, especially Thurston County?
Yeah, and that is, I think my work has been mostly, been in Elma, which is in a rural area. And so I think that does give me a unique perspective that I've spent a lot of time. I actually think that by supporting truly affordable housing and delinking our healthcare and having healthcare coverage to employment would be a huge boon for small businesses. I think that would be wonderful for people that do have some entrepreneurial spirit. If they didn't have to maintain a job, that they had to maintain their healthcare, and that they knew that would be available. I think you would see a lot of people that would be interested in opening up their small businesses and could afford to employ people.
Yeah, that's a very good point. And I haven't heard a lot of candidates raise that point, that if there was some kind of universal health care, it'd make it easier for businesses and employees to move around and to start businesses without worrying about providing health care.
Yeah.
Or losing health care if someone were to change jobs. What programs do you support to help the homeless?
Well, affordable housing. I think that we need to make the homeless problem in Olympia, which is in Thurston County, which is very visible to everybody, that we see it every day, is only a piece of the problem. I think that we are spending way too much money on shelter and emergency services. Not that those don't need to exist, but fundamentally people just need a place to live, and they need a place to live that they can afford, whether they are living on Social Security disability or a part-time minimum wage job. We need to be able to ensure that 20 or 25% of our population can afford to live in the county if we want to address homelessness. You can pour money into the problem right and left, and unless you have a place to move people into, you are never going to solve it.
Thank you. I'm looking at some chat, some questions that came in on chat just recently. And maybe you covered it in your intro and I missed it, but why did you decide to run for LD 22? What committees would you want to serve on once elected? Yeah,
well, healthcare committee would be absolutely my first choice. That's certainly where I had the most expertise, and I feel like I would have the most to offer. I had been thinking about wanting to run for a couple of years, and I had kind of in the back of my head said, okay, if an LD 22 position opens up, if one of those seats are open, I didn't want to run against an incumbent. I knew that. I thought that I would be ready to go for it. And a big reason that I like the legislature is because I very much want to continue with my clinical practice and my teaching. I don't want to transition into a full-time job. I wouldn't want to do nothing but politics. My clinic work is very important to me. And I think the legislature is a good opportunity to balance both those worlds. And several people asked me, why didn't I run for city council? And it's because I live in unincorporated Thurston County. I don't live in the city, and so I have no city council to run for. So that kind of limits how many opportunities I have.
I'll talk to Rory about running for county commission.
That's a full-time job, more a very, very full-time job, yeah.
Okay. Can you talk about any possible solutions to delinking K through 12 education dollars coming from timber sales, even given the constitutionality issue?
I do not know much about the specifics of the K through 12 education dollars coming from timber sales. I'm very familiar with the McCleary decision and the need to fully fund and equitably fund education, and that in the legislature we have passed some patches that have satisfied that Supreme Court case. But ideally, I would like to move to a situation where K through 12 education is completely and fully funded equally and equitably throughout the state, and not relying on local property taxes to provide very uneven funding.
All right.
But I would like to know more. If somebody has information that I can read up on that, please.
Okay.
Share.
Well, at the end, you can give us your links, your web pages and such, and people can get in touch with you. Maybe one more question here. If 45, I don't use his name. If 45 gets his way and allows unfettered fish farming along our U.S. coastlines, how do we as a state oppose and keep those out, keeping harm from our own wild fish populations, preventing the pollution and other liabilities these present?
Well, we pass what legislation that we can. I would imagine that would very quickly ramp into the court system. I would also say that there must be native protections because of native lands and the native fishing rights that would not be overridden by U.S. laws. And so I think you just have to be prepared, and the people that know what is coming and what those laws will look like, and be able to help write legislation so that we could be ready to pass those laws if and when that happens.
And Mary Ellen, again, I might have missed it earlier. Do you have any prior experience in serving in any public role?
So I have been a PCO for 2 years, and I serve on several boards. So I serve on the WSNA Professional Practice Council. I serve on a federal board. I don't think I'm allowed to say specific names because of campaign finance laws. And I also serve on ARNP's United, the nurse practitioners, the state board as well.
Okay, and speaking of donations, are you taking PAC money at all? And who might be your largest single donor?
I will not take any corporate PAC money. I don't know, there are exceptions to civic organizations and unions that are not considered like corporate PAC money, but no, absolutely not. My largest donor, all my donors are really friends and family and members of the community that I know and have reached out to. So I will not take any corporate money at all.
And do you recall who your largest donor might be?
Yes, so my largest donor is my friend Eric Bloomhagen, who I have known since I was 4. And he ran for the school board in Seattle 2 years ago and has been very helpful and encouraging about running. So, yep. And I believe he gave me $250.
Oh, very nice, very nice. I see Bob Clark put your webpage link on the chat if anyone wants to copy that down. And if you'd like to take a couple minutes and wrap up, Mary Ellen, we'd appreciate that.
Yeah, well, thank you. And I appreciate the tough questions because like I said, there are still a lot of things, even really learning as much as I can, as fast as I can, especially about housing and my knowledge in healthcare. I appreciate the tough questions, and there's a lot, especially around environment and education, of things that I just don't know. And so it's been really great to reach out to the community and let them, and hear from people who have that expertise and who have years of knowledge, and they can let me know a little bit more. So if anybody does have thoughts on things that I should be reading or learning about, I really appreciate that. The other thing that I really like to talk about and emphasize, other than not taking the corporate donations, is even though I am very progressive and my views are very much to the left, I have spent my whole life working with and living with and having family with people that disagree with me quite a bit. And I think it's very important for me to be listening to the community, even if they have very different political views or agendas than I do, and learning to talk with people and understand what their viewpoint is and move forward with that, rather than trying to just lead with a very progressive agenda and say, this is it, if you don't follow this, you're a terrible person, get out of my way. And I think that that's something that we really need more of right now. And I think I have very strong skills in that area.
And give us your URL one more time.
Oh, yeah, MaryEllenBiggerstaff.com.
Excellent, excellent. People can donate there and volunteer for your campaign there as well.
And then the only other question is I do ask when people are a little bit older is my dad was very involved in Thurston County politics. So his name was Eldon Rogers. He died about 7 years ago, but I always like to ask if there's anybody that worked with him or remembers working with him at the state level before. No.
I've only been here 6 years, so.
Okay.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much. And I understand there's going to be another a Q&A LD22. I think you mentioned that Thursday night.
Yes, it's going to be. Is it this Thursday or a week? It's coming up very soon. Yes.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Don't count on me. I'm not getting any of this right yet. But thank you again, and best of luck.
Okay. Thank you very much, and have a good day, everyone. I appreciate the time. Okay.
All right.
Bye.
And again, I apologize for getting here late. We have a couple minutes before we get to Rory. So if anyone just kind of wants to take a short break, 2 minutes, come back and we'll be ready to go then. So if we're all here, I think we can start again. My name is Bill DiPoto, member of Olympia Indivisible endorsement team. We have other endorsement team members sitting in as well. This is the third of 3 meet and greet sessions that Olympia Indivisible is sponsoring with candidates for LD22, seat 2, and county commissioner races. And our last but not least candidate for today is Rory Summerson, who's running for County Commissioner seat 1. Is that right, Rory? 1?
That is correct, yes.
Yeah. And 1 is the district that runs down basically the middle, north to south, Thurston County.
Yep.
Similarly, Rory, take 10 minutes or so, introductory comments, and then we'll get into some Q&A later.
Mm-hmm.
I've already received some questions in advance. Okay. People registered. We'll go through those first. And then again, if you want to send any more questions for Rory, send them to me, Bill DiPoto, through the chat app that's on the bottom, or wherever it might be, where it says chat on the menu bar. So Rory, it's all yours.
All right. Well, my name is Rory Summerson, and as you've heard, I'm running for Thurston County Commissioner District 1. And so I've been in the county for just over 12 years now. My mom moved us up here from just outside of the Portland area. I'd moved around a lot in my youth, and Thurston County is really the first place that I felt that I was able to put down actual roots. And so when we first moved to Washington, I was actually living in Lewis County in a really, really rural community. Some of you have probably heard of, called Onalaska, which is right outside of Chehalis. And we lived on a very small farm. We had some horses and some goats and some agricultural purposes in the backyard and stuff. But it was a really amazing experience coming from what was more of a city environment to a more rural environment. And so I grew up basically there in Onalaska with that really rural feel. And so when I moved up to the Olympia area, it was actually after already having met my husband, which is interesting because I had met my husband while I was still living in Onalaska. Not a lot of openly gay people in those small rural towns. And so I'd met him, and then I moved up to Tacoma very briefly to live with him. And we decided that city life just wasn't for me. And we moved back down to Thurston County, to the Olympia area, unincorporated Thurston County out by Black Lake initially. And it was, that was really kind of where I felt, Thurston County was where I felt was a good balance between a more urbanized setting and a more rural setting. So it was something that I really appreciated in the area. But also just as how affirming the area was to people who were openly gay. I really appreciated the eclectic feel of Olympia, but still balancing that with rural communities. So my kind of path here in this last 9 to 10 years. I graduated SPSCC with a degree in automotive. I utilized my experience with SPSCC to really kind of fine tune my leadership skills. Did a lot of seminars for training skills and hiring skills for youth within the automotive department. We welcomed in the welders as well. I was a strong advocate for diversity, equity, and inclusion. We really promoted wanting to get more women involved in the automotive program and in the welding program. We promoted wanting to get people from more diverse backgrounds involved in those fields because they were historically underrepresented. So we provided a space for that actively. I served as the treasurer for the automotive club, managing a budget of about $50,000. And with that budget, for the first time in our history, I was able to get our students involved with Skills USA, which is a international leadership skills competition-based program. And we succeeded quite well. We had a lot of students place and bring home various awards for leadership skills, customer service skills, communications, and technical skills. So it was an amazing experience for our students. And what it really did was promote this idea that young people should be more involved in local business. Young people should be more involved in leadership roles. I mean, it was what really solidified that within myself, was serving in that capacity there at SPSCC. We did a lot of community organized events that were safety events whereby people would come in and they would give donations for the food bank, and we would provide full 12 to 24 point inspections, safety inspections on their vehicles. People of every economic background were welcome to come in all throughout the community and do that food donation. And so we felt that we were benefiting the community in multiple ways in that avenue. And so it was really under my leadership that we made that happen. When I graduated from SPSCC, I was immediately promoted at my current employer to assistant manager. There were some issues at the business whereby one of the people who was historically helping the owner manage the responsibilities was no longer available to do so. And so I stepped into that position to help manage OSHA compliance, shop and service issues. I maintain a fleet of 6 vehicles, and I serve as the intermediary between our actual workers and the owner, and try to facilitate healthy communications in terms of what the workers' needs are. So that's really what my purpose is at the company. Currently, I am laid off. I've been laid off temporarily since March 13th. And so it's been kind of an interesting experience in that this whole time that I've been running it was because I felt that the Board of Commissioners needed a voice of people who are less heard, people who are directly experiencing financial woes in the community, those who are struggling with rents, and how high rent is, as I'm currently a renter and have been my whole life. I've never owned a home. So it's an experience that I feel is something very close to my heart, and wanting to try to mitigate that a little bit for people who are not in a higher economic position. And so I've been able to kind of bring that into my platform. So my platform was really, the first 2 things that I thought were really important to me were affordable housing and making sure that we're dealing with the people that are in the camps right now and transitioning them into a housing situation and providing for their needs through access to critical services. And I know Mary Ellen spoke to this for a minute, but my focus is really more along the lines of mental health. I've dealt with a lot of mental health issues in my family as it relates to guns and just mental health in general. And so I have a lot of experiential positioning about how I view these issues, and what the impacts can be, especially so my mom, she raised me as a single mom of 2 kids, and had to deal with all of that adversity, but then also having to deal with family members around us committing suicide. And how much of a struggle that was for our family while she was trying to be a successful single working mother. And so those experiences, I think, frame my belief that we need more access to providers in the area that can deal with long-term treatment. Because it's not just about beds and making sure that we can do triage, it's about how can we address the long-term needs of the community, drug abuse, counseling, stabilization, and then transitioning back into a workforce in a healthy and productive manner. So those were really core focuses for me initially. I think one of the additional pillars that stuck out to me really early on was this need for us to have balanced and equitable budgets. We have some serious budgeting issues in the county, even prior to coronavirus, and now they've been exacerbated. What we do know and what we've heard already from Mary Ellen is that we have a very regressive taxation system. And so, you know, how do we balance that in the county is something that I'm really wanting to have discussions around going forward. I have a lot to learn as a really young person, but I think that our goal, our focus, my vision is really that we're prioritizing the needs of people who are lower on the financial totem pole. You know, we should not be prioritizing large corporations. We shouldn't be giving huge tax breaks to developers right now. Like, in reality, there are people who actually need these benefits and need these funds from the county to benefit programs that work for them and work for everybody equitably. And then also, I think the final pillar that I have on my platform that was really important to me was really this pillar about the environment and conservation and restoration. And I did see that message from Madeline in the everyone chat below, and I thought it was too funny because I like the idea of doing of Thurston Conservation District doing rates and charge assessments, and I love that it's actually something that can be modified over time. It's not one set amount. There's room for discussion ongoing. And why I think that's important is because I think we need this ability for rapid response. When things change dramatically in our budget, we need to be able to respond to that. And so having the ability to modify those programs is really important. But I do support this idea of rates and charges because we do know that various areas have different conservation needs, and all of those needs cost different things or cost different amounts. And realistically, we know that climate change is not going to be cheap. We're going to have to invest in our futures. And so I think that that's one way, those rates and charges assessments are one way that we can help to invest in our future by means of bolstering conservation efforts where it's needed most. You know, I also think that my running for office has a lot to do with how young I am. I think that the Democratic Party as a whole, many of the progressive organizations that I've worked with historically really believe that we need to have more generational involvement. Not to say that we need less people in older generations, just that we also need more people in younger generations so that our community is actually represented equitably. And that's something that I don't see happening right now. And I would also love it if our Board of Commissioners wasn't majority controlled by law enforcement, because realistically, that's where we're at. And I believe that Ty, as the progressive up there, really needs the extra votes for us to start swaying the discussion away from how we use law enforcement as a band-aid for our problems to real solutions to systemic issues. And so I've been fully supportive of Ty for the long term, and so it's been really hard for me to sit back and watch these last 2 years where the lens of law enforcement is really dictating what we do in the county, and that's a really big concern of mine, and a lot of the reason why I'm running. So I think that we really need somebody who's going to be able to aggressively say, you know, I'm not going to support overspending by law enforcement, and I really want people who are suffering to have those revenues, those budgetary revenues that they need. So that's my 10 minutes, though.
That's very close. Very good. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks for keeping to that, Rory. So some Q&A?
Yeah.
Okay, very good. We'll go to the previously submitted questions. And the first one is, if a county department has exceeded its budget, but then asks for additional funding, what would be your response?
You better have a really good justification why you need this. I understand that costs can fluctuate. I mean, that is the reality of it. But if an agency or a department within the county has exceeded their budget, there needs to be a really strong evaluation as to why they exceeded their budget and what the additional revenue is going to achieve. And so I think, if I had to guess, this is probably in relation to the sheriff's department and some of the budgeting concerns we've seen there. So $500,000 overage in 2019 with an expected $500,000 overage in 2020, which I think is probably not going to happen now given our current budgetary standing. But that's still up for debate, right? And so the commissioners still have to make a final decision in that area. I don't support the sheriff's department's supposed need for those additional dollars, and I would be very strict in suggesting that we need more streamlined approaches to reporting so that we have a more thorough understanding of why these budgets, why these additional dollars are being requested, and balancing that with how effective the previous overage was.
Okay, thank you. And for the record, you're running against Hutchings, the incumbent.
Yeah.
Blake is also in the race as
I know.
supposed independent with the other Democrats. All right. From whom have you received endorsements, and from who do you want to seek endorsements in the future?
Yeah. So currently, my endorsements, I have 3 active endorsements right now that I'm putting out publicly. Everything else is kind of tentative because what I've heard as a young candidate is people are reluctant early on to endorse, especially in a race where people didn't know who else was going to join the race. But additionally, now that we see that there are 3 Democrats in the race, it's a hard decision for people to have to decide with anybody. So the endorsements I have so far are Michael Stedman, from Lacey City Council, Charlie Schneider from Tumwater City Council. I have some tentative support from other city council members from Lacey, Tumwater, and from Olympia, and I also have some support from Molly Carmoody down in Yelm. I think as far as organizations that I would like to see support from in the future, and I also have the Washington Progressive Caucus endorsement. This week I have a long slate of interviews that I'm going through, with this one being included. I hope to receive your guys' endorsement. It would mean the world to me, it really would. But beyond that, I am interviewing with the Washington Progressive Party. So I've done the caucus, now I'm interviewing with the party. I expect to probably get endorsed by the Thurston County Dems. I've been a pretty long time active member now, and I serve as a PCO and I'm an LD delegate. I think I expect to see a lot of support from unions and endorsement from unions, as I am the only labor candidate in the race.
And that was, your union was automotive repair?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
And how is the Thurston Board of Commissioners going to deal with budget problems? You touched on it earlier.
Yeah. It's going to be an interesting thing to see over the next couple of months how they proceed in this direction. My vision for the situation would really be kind of reassessing what the actual budgetary needs is for the previous biennium budget amendments that were done. I saw that there was a pretty significant reduction in terms of critical services and healthcare, and there was an expansion in terms of law enforcement. I would go the other direction. I would actually have reversed that specifically. I think that there's a lot of room for us to reassess law enforcement needs in terms of being able to do in-home monitoring, in terms of being able to reassess what types of vehicles we use for our police force, for the sheriff's police force. And I think that there's also some room to have discussion around facility costs, since we're not utilizing facilities right now as actively as we were, and that's going to be the case for the foreseeable future, at least for 1 to 2 years. So there is definitely some room, and we've been told for years and years and years, no, people can't work from home. Well, we've proved they can. So that is something that I think needs to be taken into consideration. But yeah, transitioning over to EV vehicles, electric vehicles, where possible. And so I think there are various avenues within each department where we could be cutting budgets. And I think part of that process starts by putting all the departments on a zero-based budget, at least in terms of studying where we can make adjustments going forward.
All right. I've heard that term before, zero-based budget. Can you explain that to others who might not know?
So yeah, a true zero-based budget is actually just starting from scratch, like eliminating everything and determining what the actual needs of the department is. That's the most basic fundamental explanation that you can give.
And would you require that every year? How would that work?
It would be my hope that is occurring every year. I think that there may be some room to negotiate that for specific departments based on what services and programs are offered by that department. But certainly our population is changing every year. It's changing every month, every day. Certainly our needs are changing every day. And so if we're not able to review those needs, proactively, then we're really setting ourselves up for failure in terms of the budget. So yeah, I think it should be reviewed more often, whether that's an every year or every 2-year thing, maybe more, maybe less. I think that there needs to be a really healthy discussion around that from the community, providing that advice to the Board of County Commissioners. And I think there needs to be a lot more public comment around that and citizens oversight.
Okay. Where do you place education in your platform, public and or private?
So I'm not a huge supporter of private education. I do believe in leveling the playing field for public education. I think for me, it's really weird because I look at things like public education out of this stance of needing like a standard, a minimum standard that's global. And obviously that's not something that we can really affect change in at the county level. But I think a lot of our problems that we encounter in terms of how communities address issues, in terms of bigotry, and in terms of a lot of fundamental things that play into the decision making that we proceed under, has to do with education. Education is really what sets us up for success. And so my preference would be that we have a really healthy funded public education system, and that we are not so I mean, it was mentioned earlier, charter schools. Would I support charter schools? Absolutely not. I would not support funding them at any level higher than what we are, and I would actually probably support reducing that and diverting those funds back into public education where it should be. The public education has shown historically to be the great equalizer, and we need to promote that. Realistically, where it falls in my platform is really underneath that people first platform. So really determining what the needs of our community is. And I believe that one of those fundamental needs is education. So how we actually achieve greater funding in that area, obviously our education system is primarily funded through bonds and levies. I would be okay with a discussion for a bond and levy cap increase, and some additional discussion around how we can better source funding for education in the future. What the full scope of that dynamic is obviously an ongoing discussion, and something that I'm not really prepared to discuss at the moment.
Having lived in Thurston County for just a few years, what makes you better than any other candidate running?
You know, it's weird because I've never been the type to think of myself as better than another person. I'm humble enough to know that we all have our strengths, we all have our weaknesses. And Thurston is a really interesting test case because we actually do have a pretty even mix between more conservative values and more liberal values if you look at the county as a whole. And so my district, District 1 that I'm running for, does lean more Democratic and progressive. So I think, at least in terms of the district, I think we need more progressive Democratic leadership in that position in this district. As a whole, I think that, you know, it's a slightly different discussion that is had. And so, is there anything else you would like to, like, is there a specific angle you had a question about in terms of that?
No, not me specifically. I was just reading the question as it came in. I personally don't have anything to add to the question.
Yeah.
People can elaborate in the chat if they want, and we'll get further on if we have time. But I'm going to go to the next question right now.
Yeah.
As a county commissioner, would you promote sustainable, or how would you promote sustainable agricultural practices?
Yeah, so this is interesting because I really do feel like we do need to have more attention paid towards conserving agricultural areas and rural farms. I mean, we see that large corporations and large corporate farms are really damaging smaller farming ventures and community farms. And I think that community and smaller rural farms actually do more for the community. And so I would really like to see a bolstering of resources for conservation efforts and AG efforts. I think that the agricultural community plays a big role in this because the agricultural community can also take on new projects, like being able to invest in, so the marijuana industry, as an example, the hemp industry. Agriculture can help to be a leader in that arena as well. And so I think that promoting agriculture in terms that we are providing for equitable say in how we allocate land use is certainly something that's a priority for me. Being from a more rural community, I know that we are also heavily dependent on rural agriculture. At least in our state, you know, I would say that that's true. You know, we're very dependent on you know, the eastern side of the state doing fruit and onions and apple production. And so but that plays into into other parts of our economy. Like, so it also plays into immigration and such. So it's there's a lot of intersectionality in that area, but I do very much support bolstering small farms and rural agriculture to the extent that we can with the Board of County Commissioners.
And you touched on this earlier, but this is a kind of a different take on the question. How can we reduce law enforcement spending and still stay safe?
Yes. So, and I touched on this, and while it is a slightly different angle, I still think it's much in line with my previous statements as well, is that we could very much look at in-home monitoring systems that for people who are nonviolent offenders, or for people who have some type of drug conviction, or people who have something that is more mental health related, doing diversionary treatments. I also believe that we could be looking at investing in community courts rather than the current municipal system that we have as a priority, so to help reduce some costs. And I think that there's a lot of cost sharing opportunities between municipalities that we could pursue. We can also reduce costs in terms of law enforcement by simply addressing what types of vehicles we use. So there are a lot of avenues that we can have these discussions. So like, instead of portions of the entire county being patrolled by SUVs, there are definitely hybrid options and electric vehicle options that could reduce fuel costs. And so there are a lot of ways that we could potentially reduce costs in law enforcement that wouldn't have a negative impact on how safe we are as a community.
All right. Now we're getting to the chat questions.
Okay.
And first one of those is, what would you say is the county's role in helping solve the region's homeless crisis?
Yeah, so what we've seen in the county, and this has been my read, so what we've seen in the county is that we've seen a lot of the more rural areas in the county kind of diverting the homeless population into Olympia. And I live in Olympia. I live up in the hill by the courthouse. I live in a little tiny 1-bedroom apartment. It's kind of obnoxious, but I love it here. And so what we have seen, because I drive down that road every day there on Deschutes, frequently. And so I've seen how big the camp has gotten and the changes over time there in Olympia. And so while I think that obviously the problem has not been addressed in Olympia, I also think that, other portions of the county diverting the population to Olympia has been problematic. So I think that the county itself plays, and this is smaller municipalities that have kind of pushed the burden back into Olympia. So I think the county stands to be able to utilize county facilities. So the port had mentioned in the previous port race, we saw a lot of discussion about the port having facilities that can house these people temporarily and provide for transitionary services. And I think that it was brought up by Helen Wheatley, who I supported heavily in that race. And so I thought that, that's something that was one of the reasons why I was so supportive of her, because she was looking at ways where the port could help with this. And so the county can help in terms of facilitating those discussions with the port and with the various municipalities, and also providing facilities. I think one of the other interesting ways that the county could help is something that I've been really supportive of. So if you look at Okanagan County and what they've done with Wi-Fi access and hotspots. So part of the problem with getting people transitioned away from their unhoused situation is as actually available services that they can utilize for job applications and for stabilization, for research, for any number of things, for education, for any number of things along those lines. So if we had all of our county facilities providing publicly accessible Wi-Fi, that would actually do a lot to, at very minimal cost, would do a lot to provide an opportunity for these people to apply for and transition out of homelessness by means of applying for jobs and re-engaging with the workforce in a way that they wouldn't be able to currently.
All right. What are your creative ideas around helping join a very diverse citizenry in Thurston County? I mean, figuratively and literally, we've got Evergreen College on the left and the military bases on the right.
Right.
And there's a lot of conflicting opinion. Any thoughts on helping these people all talk to one another more functionally?
There's a lot of mediation stuff that's involved with this, but I think a lot of it has to do with facilitating more town halls and forums. that actually are built around the idea of having people come in from various factions, as it were, and into a facilitated meeting whereby it may be a larger structure, but then there are facilitators and you can pair off in groups and have discussions and have a real opportunity to hear all sides. I'm one of those people that, much like Mary Ellen, I like to hear all sides. I really like to be somebody who allows people to voice their concerns and actually hear them before I make a judgment on anything. And what I have found is that we all actually agree on what the problems are. We just disagree on how to solve them. And so there's a starting base there. There's commonality there. And so I think the discussion really happens around what is the commonality and then branching out from there. And I think a lot of that has to do with public forums. But I think the flip side of that is making sure that all of our advisory committees and all of our advisory boards have representation from all of those different groups. So I definitely think that we need to incorporate more people of color, more young people, more women in all of our advisory committees, but we also need to have those specific people also be representative of JBLM and different interests throughout the county, so that we have an actual diverse and representative body within the various advisory boards and commissions that report and advise the Board of County Commissioners.
Has this recent pandemic crisis changed your mind about how government provides services or should respond to such a crisis, and include the request by the Sheriff's Department for hazard pay?
Yeah, I knew that was going to come. Let's start with the hazard pay thing, because I'm actually really frustrated about it. The thing would be is that if we're going to be doing hazard pay, it should be equitable across the board. There shouldn't be prioritization of law enforcement. I think the reason why that happened is because we have two members of the Board of County Commissioner right now who are former law enforcement and are more sensitive to their needs than they are to other members of the populace. And I think that is a fundamental issue for me. Not a direction I would go. So if we're going to be doing hazard pay for county agencies and departments, it should be across the board or not at all, period. We are not proceeding in a way that is equitable and representative of our community right now. And so that's a huge problem for me. Beyond that, to the other portion of that question is, do I feel like we should be addressing things differently? No, I always felt the same way, that we really needed to be prioritizing social safety nets and making sure that our community is taken care of, that we're putting people first before we put large organizations, corporations, and large businesses first. We need to be promoting protections for the workforce and for workers, whether that be in small business, whether that be at county workers, whether that be state workers, or whatever the case may be. They need to be the priority. And additionally, the unhoused population. So our solution should always be geared towards the populace and not towards various special interest entities.
So what would you say to those demonstrators who show up on the Capitol steps and saying it's time to reopen businesses?
I would say, please go home.
Okay.
Realistically, what I know, and I'll give you a little bit of insight about why I feel this way in terms of at least my small business. So my small business, we are not able to source protective equipment right now. We already have a requirement from OSHA and LNI that we provide a certain level of personal protective equipment to our staff, because we deal with hazardous chemicals before we do our dilution process and use it as a treatment for floors and everything. We're in direct contact with those substances. And so there are certain requirements that we have to meet within our industry to provide for a safe workspace for our employees and for our customers. We can't do that right now. Those pieces of personal protective equipment are not available at all. We can't even source them. So my boss placed an order internationally from China to get masks. Those masks were delayed by 2 weeks on delivery, and he paid a significantly higher price to gain access to those masks. He still hasn't even gotten them. We literally currently do not have the resources to open up. We just don't. And so while I understand that this is a huge pocketbook issue for everybody, I don't want my business to be closed down. I really don't. I'm really, really concerned about the financial stability of my employees. But I'm also concerned that if we open up early, before we have contact tracing, before we have testing, before we have an adequate streamlined supply of personal protective equipment, that we're just inviting a second wave. And we know that's going to happen because we've seen it historically. The data, the metrics are there. And what we know is that we're not even meeting the recommendations of the CDC currently. So until that happens, I would tell people very politely, please go home. And this is why, because you're only making the situation worse. We're going to see a second wave, and it's going to be pretty drastic. We saw people coming in from out of the county to some of these protests. We saw them coming in from out of the state. We know that these protests were organized by right-wing factions. That is not disputed. And so my concern is that we've already seen test cases, and we've already seen COVID cases that are the result of those protests for people that came to those protests that went back to their own communities. So we know that the spikes will happen. And if we don't have the resources to keep everybody safe, then the cost of reopening will actually be exacerbated, because we're going to close again and then reopen again. And then people in our communities will lose confidence in our ability to reopen safely. And that's going to cause a whole another can of worms to open. So that's a big concern of mine.
Okay. Could you clarify, you said you had endorsement from the Progressive Caucus, and you were going to seek Progressive Party endorsement. Is it the Washington Progressive Party, or is it the Washington Democratic Progressive Caucus?
It's the Washington Progressive Party, and they reached out to me when they saw that I was endorsed by the Washington Progressive Caucus. And so I looked through their platform. It seems to be very similar. They use the same metrics to determine endorsement that the Washington Progressive Caucus is, but they also tie it in for recommendations from Our Revolution. So for those of you who don't know, I started in politics with Our Revolution Thurston, and doing organizing for Our Revolution and organizing for Bernie. And so that was, it's kind of my expectation that I'll also receive Our Revolution's endorsement, because I'm fairly well aligned with the platform, obviously, as one of the historically being an organizer. But yeah, the Washington Progressive Party seems to be a newer party. But yeah, they reached out to me to see if I would be interested, and the platform seems in line with the majority of my belief structures. So I did deign to apply to go to their next agenda meeting so that I can hear from them and they can hear from me.
All right. Well, okay. Thanks for clarifying that.
Yeah.
What is your position on the use of pesticides in both park and agricultural and even private lands? And
I'm so glad you're asking.
How do we move towards limiting poisonous effects on our waterways and wildlife?
Yeah, so the first thing that I would say is I love bees. I absolutely love bees. They're this, like, the foundation of our entire agricultural system. We can't do, like, humanity dies without bees, right? So I mean, just as a core fundamental thing. And interestingly, my campaign almost ran with a bee as our logo. It's a whole nother story. But so my core focus would be like removing all harmful pesticides. I would love to see a ban on all harmful pesticides throughout the entire county, but starting with a complete ban on neonics. And so those are substances and pesticides that we know to be damaging to the bee population. And so that would be where I would want to start with that discussion. But we also know that there are substitutes that are non-toxic for almost every pesticide that we use in agriculture today. So I think that that's something that we should proceed under countywide.
And how would you go about that, about doing that?
I think it starts with the resolution. The Board of County Commissioners being resolved to approach a non-toxic pesticide use policy throughout the county, and then it goes into the advisory boards and having conversations with the various advisory boards, local farms and local agriculture, by means of a collaborative discussion about how we can do this and suss out what products would be on the approval list and which ones weren't, which ones were most cost effective and which ones weren't. But there's not much argument to be made that we need to be using environmentally damaging pesticides when there are non-damaging pesticides that are available. And so for me, it would be about facilitating a collaborative discussion on the topic, and kind of pushing that through as a priority.
All right. This is probably the last question. There's a a petition circulating to get the commissioner's endorsement from the public utility district to have the public utility district move towards electricity distribution. What's your stand on that? Would you support that?
You would have my vote. Yes, I fully support public power and that initiative as a whole. I've seen how effective it is. I think that one of the key things that can be said for public power is that it actually gives the community control, and to the effect that we would then be able to be in a stronger position to say, no, we're not going to be working with PSC. We're not going to be working and accepting LNG. We're not going to be sourcing fossil fuels for our power. It really puts us in a stronger position within our public utilities district to have more oversight over where we source our power and what the actual costs are in the long term. So I definitely support moving towards public power within our PUD.
All right. Do you want to take a few minutes and wrap up? Give us your URL and tell people how to help you out if they wish.
Yeah. Of course. So the first thing I want to say is we're starting phone banking on Sunday. So if any of you love phone banking, please reach out to me. You can email the campaign at info@voterory.com. That is also posted down below. And my URL is voterory.com. So, you know, the obligatory www is not necessary. You can just do https://voterory.com.
Triple W is easier.
It is easier, but you can also in your browsers nowadays, you can just type voterory.com and that'll get you there all by itself.
Right.
What I would say is above and beyond that is I am very passionate about this community. I work on the board of two nonprofits right now. I work on Partners in Prevention Education and I work on empowerment. The goal of both of those nonprofits is to give a voice to people who are less heard, to encourage diversity, and to actually look out for the community members that need the support. And that's the whole reason why I'm running, is to give a voice to people who are less heard, to facilitate a collaborative discussion, to really encourage generational representation, and to move the needle back towards progressive values. We really need to get our majority back. I feel I'm the person to help do that. And I'm really hoping that Olympia Indivisible and the Jubilee Dems will help me to do that. So again, visit my website. You can sign up to volunteer on the website. The phone number below that's listed in the chat, that 789-2173, I have that on me all the time. If you have a question, call me. If you want more input, call me. I'll chat with you. It's my goal to make sure that in politics that the constituency has the ability to interface with their electeds. And that's a core principle of mine. So please call me if you have questions, and I will help to guide your concerns through the lens of my understanding.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Rory. It was a pleasure chatting with you. I'm glad you put the time aside to talk to us. We want to wish you luck in your campaign, and we hope to see you again soon.
Thank you. I so appreciate all of you. I really appreciate you having me, and I hope you enjoy the rest of this beautiful day.
Thanks a lot. Take care now.
Bye now.
Safe.
Thanks.
All right. So that wraps up 3 sessions. We're a little early. I think that's all right, though. I appreciate this message from JJL to everyone. And JJ, just so you know, there is a process. There's going to be a membership meeting of some sort, virtual meeting, where all of the candidates, and we just only heard 6 of them in these 3 sessions. But we're going to there's going to be a session for all the membership on all of the candidates running from Public Utility District on up through Congressional District 10. And there'll be presentations with slides and commentary. And following that, for the following week, set up by the steering committee, there will be a voting session where members will get to vote on who they wish to endorse through ranked choice voting. So hang in there, pay attention to the emails that are coming out, and you'll see very soon. I believe that the presentation will be June 10th, and the week thereafter will be the time to vote for endorsements.